You will never take my place." The room was plunged in a stifling gloom when Amina opened her eyes. Her head throbbed with a dull pain that seemed to pierce her skull from side to side. She tried to sit up, but her limbs didn't respond with the speed she expected. Her whole body felt heavy, as if she had been submerged in thick honey for hours. Her mouth tasted bitter, metallic, strange. She blinked several times, trying to focus her gaze on the surrounding darkness. The silence in the house was unnatural, disturbing. She couldn't hear her mother's voice preparing breakfast, nor the hurried footsteps of the maids. Nothing, only an absolute void that made her skin crawl. She brought a trembling hand to her forehead. She was still wearing the dress from the previous night, but it was wrinkled, dirty, as if she had slept in it for days. Panic began to climb up her throat like a poisonous vine. She stood up with difficulty, staggering, and walked towards her bedroom door. She pushed again, harder. Nothing. It was locked from the outside. Her heart accelerated into a frantic drum against her ribs. She hit the wood with her fists once, twice, 3 times. "Mother, open the door. Mother, please." Her voice sounded hoarse, desperate. She kept hitting until her knuckles burned. Finally, she heard footsteps on the other side. The door opened just a crack, and her mother's face appeared in the doorway. But it wasn't the loving face she knew. It was the face of a stranger, of someone who had made a terrible decision and was willing to live with the consequences. "Mother, what's happening? Why was I locked in? Where is Soraya? Where are the Sultan's emissaries?" Mother looked down, unable to meet her eyes, and in that guilt-laden silence, Amina understood that something irreparable had happened. 3 days before that awakening in the prison of her own room, the kingdom of Kamar was living its days with its usual peaceful routine. It was a small but prosperous kingdom, nestled between imposing mountains and fertile valleys, where the best dates in the entire region grew. Merchant caravans constantly crossed it. In the heart of the kingdom stood the palace of Sultan Rashid, a majestic construction of white towers that shone like pearls under the midday sun. Rashid was a man of 32, a widower for 3 years, with no heirs and the weight of a throne that demanded continuity. His wife had died of fever during the harshest winter anyone could remember, taking with her not only his love but also the hope of an heir. The kingdom needed stability. His counselors pressured him. The vizier repeated the same litany to him every week. A sultan without offspring was a kingdom without a future. Finally, Rashid gave in, not for love, but out of duty. He sent emissaries to every corner of the kingdom with a specific order, to find a woman with a noble, kind heart, worth the crown. He didn't care about wealth or exuberant beauty. He wanted someone to heal the wounds his heart still carried. If this story is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like so we can reach more people. On the outskirts of the capital, in a modest but dignified house, lived 2 sisters who shared blood but nothing more. Soraya, the eldest, was 24 and had an ambition that devoured everything in its path. She was beautiful, no one denied that. Her black hair fell like a silk waterfall down. Her almond-shaped eyes could seduce or intimidate at her convenience. She passed, but behind that beauty lay a deep dissatisfaction that consumed her from within. Nothing was ever enough for Soraya. No compliment filled the hole in her chest. No achievement satisfied her. She always wanted more. She always looked upward with envy, comparing herself to those who had what. And what she desired most in the world was to be seen, admired, envied. She wanted power. She wanted a throne. Amina, 2 years younger, was her opposite in every way. She did not possess her sister's dazzling beauty, but she had something Soraya could never buy or fake, a serene soul. She was of medium height, with honey-colored eyes that reflected genuine warmth and a smile that made people around her feel safe. Since she was a child, she helped the elderly in the neighborhood, healed injured birds, shared her food with the neediest, without expecting anything in return. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because her heart knew no other way to exist. While Soraya studied strategies for social climbing, Amina read poetry in the garden. Convenient alliances, Amina conversed with the children in the market. They were so different, it was hard to believe they shared parents. The news arrived one summer afternoon, when the sun was still burning high in the sky. A group of royal emissaries, dressed in tunics embroidered with golden thread, arrived on horseback at the entrance of the house. Dust rose in golden clouds behind them. The leader, a man with a grey beard and a severe gaze, dismounted elegantly and knocked on the door. The sister's mother, an older woman named Layla, opened it with trembling hands. She knew what such a visit meant. "We seek the young Amina, daughter of this house. Sultan Rashid has been informed of her kindness and nobility of character. Her name has been chosen among many. She will be taken to the palace to be evaluated as a possible wife for the Sultan." The silence that followed was deafening. Layla brought a hand to her chest, unable to process the words. Amina, who had been watering plants in the inner courtyard, dropped the clay jug she was holding. The water spread across the tiles like a liquid omen. Soraya, who had been listening from her bedroom window, felt something dark and viscous twisting in her stomach. Envy, pure, burning, unbearable envy. Why her? Why always her? Soraya was more beautiful, more elegant, more prepared for life at court. She had studied etiquette, learned to play. And yet they had chosen Amina, the simple one, the naive one, the one who spent her days caring for animals. It was an unforgivable injustice. The leader of the emissaries continued speaking, explaining the departure date, the gifts the Sultan sent as a sign. Amina listened in a daze, unable to form words. She didn't want this. She had never dreamed of palaces or crowns. Her greatest aspiration was to have a small family, a home full of love, perhaps a garden where she could grow herbs. But refusing an invitation from the Sultan was not an option. It was an honor and an obligation at the same time. The following days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Seamstresses arrived at the house to take. Protocol masters came to teach Amina how to address the Sultan, how to walk, how to sit, how to bow her head in respect. Overwhelming. Amina felt like a puppet being prepared for a show watched from the shadows. Every dress that arrived was a stab. Every etiquette lesson was an insult. Every smile her mother gave Amina was a confirmation that she, the eldest daughter, the most beautiful. The darkness in her heart grew day by day, feeding on the perceived injustice until she could no longer contain it. The night before the departure, the family organized a small farewell dinner. It was an intimate gathering, just them and some close relatives. Roasted lamb with spices, saffron rice. Soraya, on the other hand, ate with appetite, smiling, chatting animatedly, as if nothing disturbed her. It was a perfect performance. When dinner ended and the guests left, Soraya approached her sister with a cup of spiced wine in her hands. "You must be exhausted," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Here, this will help you sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day and you need rest." Trusting, grateful for her sister's unusually kind gesture, Amina accepted the cup and drank it to the last drop. The liquid was sweet, warm, comforting. She didn't detect the bitter taste of the sleeping potion that Soraya had ground with her own hands and dissolved with diabolical patience. In less than 20 minutes, Amina began to feel dizzy. Her eyelids became heavy. Her thoughts slowed into a confused swamp. She barely had time to reach her room before collapsing onto the bed, unconscious. Soraya waited an hour to ensure the sleeping draught had taken full effect. Then, with precise, calculated movements, Amina was fast asleep, unaware of the betrayal unfolding around her. Soraya took the dresses the emissaries had sent, the jewels, the letters sealed with the Sultan's emblem. She packed everything into travel trunks. Then, with a coldness that would have terrified anyone who knew her, she closed the door to Amina's room from the outside. Her sister would wake up locked in, confused, powerless. By then, she would already be on her way to the palace. She went downstairs and found her mother in the kitchen. Layla looked up and froze upon seeing her eldest daughter. "What are you doing? What is this, Soraya?" "What should have been from the beginning," Soraya replied firmly. "I will go to the palace. I will be the Sultan's wife, and you will nothing." Layla took a step back, bringing a trembling hand to her mouth. "This is madness. You can't. The emissaries know Amina's name. They expect Amina." "The emissaries have never seen Amina," ruthless logic. They only know her name, and I will carry that name. When I arrive at the palace, I will say I am Amina. No one will know the difference." "But your sister? What about your sister?" Soraya looked at her with a hardness that froze her mother's blood. "My sister will sleep until tomorrow afternoon. By then I will be too far away, and if you try to say anything, if you try to send a message to the palace, you will destroy this family. The Sultan will not forgive being deceived. He will execute us all." "So you will remain silent, mother, for your own good, for everyone's good." Layla wanted to protest, to scream, to run to Amina's room and wake her, but fear paralyzed her. Fear of the Sultan's wrath, of public dishonor, of ruin. Soraya had woven her trap cunningly, and Layla fell into it like a cornered animal. She nodded with tears in her eyes, hating herself but unable to act. The next morning, when the emissaries arrived at dawn, Soraya received them with a radiant smile and a perfect curtsy. She wore the most beautiful dress, her hair braided with gold threads, her eyes made up with kohl. She looked like a princess from ancient. The leader of the emissaries bowed his head. "Miss Amina, it is an honor to the palace. The Sultan eagerly awaits your arrival." Soraya smiled and climbed into the carriage. As the wheels began to turn and the house faded into the distance, she felt no remorse, only satisfaction. Finally, fate was giving her what she had always deserved. Inside the house, Amina woke hours later with a pounding dry mouth. It took her several minutes to understand where she was. She tried to open the door and discovered she was locked in. She screamed, hit, pleaded. Finally, her mother opened the door, her face distorted by guilt. Amina bombarded her with questions, but Layla couldn't meet her gaze. The words came out haltingly, shameful, devastating. "Soraya left. She took your place. She pretended to be you. She must be arriving at the palace by now." Amina felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. It wasn't possible. Her sister couldn't have done such a thing to her, but her mother's guilty look, the silence of the house, the absence of the emissaries, everything confirmed the horror. She had been betrayed by her own flesh and blood, by the person she trusted the most. Tears began to stream down her cheeks uncontrollably. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pain so profound it had no name. She collapsed to the floor, hugging her knees, trembling. Her mother tried to approach, but Amina rejected her with a gesture. "How could you allow it? How could you let her go?" Layla sobbed, but she had no answers that could justify her. "I was afraid. She said if I said anything, the Sultan would execute us all, too. So you chose to save your life and sacrifice mine." The following days were a silent speak or move. Her family tried to justify what had happened with empty excuses. Her father, a weak man who had always yielded to pressure, told her that maybe it was better this way, that Soraya was more prepared for life at court, that Amina was too innocent, too kind to intrigue. Every word was a slap. Every attempt at justification was a confirmation that her own family had chosen complicit silence over justice. Amina then understood a terrible truth. She was completely alone. She had no allies, no defenders. Her family had decided that the price of their betrayal was acceptable if it meant maintaining the throne's favor, even if it was based on a lie. Indignation grew within her like a flame fanned by the wind. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal, it was the absolute injustice of knowing that Soraya would live her life, sleep in her bed, bear her in her own home. And no one, absolutely no one. If she wanted justice, she would have to find it herself. If she wanted answers, she would have to go look for them. That night, while the house slept, Amina made a decision. She would not stay locked up as a passive victim. She would escape, go to the palace, confront her sister, and discover if the Sultan was a just man or just another tyrant who rewarded lies. With trembling but determined hands, she tied improvised rope, opened her bedroom window down. It was a dangerous fall, but she had a deep breath, commended herself to divine mercy, began to descend. The night wind whipped her face. She touched the ground. She ran without looking back, into the darkness of the night towards an The carriage passed through the palace gates just as the sun began its descent towards the horizon, tinting the white towers golden and pink. Soraya watched from the window, her eyes shining with satisfied greed. She had achieved the impossible. She had taken destiny into her own hands. The palace gates were monumental, carved from cedar wood with ivory inlays forming hypnotic geometric patterns. Guards in shining armor stood at attention as she passed. Servants bowed with deep reverence. Everything was exactly as she had imagined during secret fantasies. The carriage stopped in front of the main entrance, and an elderly butler, dressed in turquoise with silver thread, opened the door with almost religious solemnity. "Welcome to the Palace of Kamar, Miss Amina. The Sultan awaits your presence in the private audience hall." Soraya descended with studied grace, careful with every movement, every gesture. She had practiced this in her mind 1,000 times. She couldn't make mistakes. The butler guided her through endless doors decorated with silk tapestries telling stories of various conquests. The floors were of polished marble that reflected the torch flames like liquid. Ornamental fountains splashed the air with the relaxing sound of running water. Everything breathed power, wealth, magnificence. Soraya felt her heart beating strongly against her chest. From nerves, it was pure excitement. She was finally where she had always belonged. They arrived at a double door guarded by 4 guards. The butler announced her arrival with the doors opened slowly, revealing an intimate yet elegant. Persian rugs covered the floor, velvet cushions lined the walls, and in the center, sitting on a low divan, Sultan Rashid. Soraya had heard descriptions of him, but none had done him justice. He was a man of imposing presence, even at rest. His face was severe but handsome, with a carefully trimmed beard framing a color of dark amber, deep and intelligent. He wore tunics of dark indigo with golden embroidery on the shoulders. He wore no crown, but he didn't need one. Power emanated from him like heat from fire. "Come closer," he said in a deep voice. Soraya advanced with measured steps. She executed a perfect curtsy she had practiced in front of the mirror for days. She kept her gaze down out of respect, though inside she burned with curiosity to study him better. "So you are Amina," Rashid continued. "My vizier spoke highly of you. He says your kindness is known throughout the kingdom, that you help the needy without expecting anything in return, that your heart is as pure as spring water." Soraya felt a pang of irritation at the description, but suppressed it quickly. "Your vizier is very generous with his words, my sultan." The words sounded correct, appropriate, but there was something in her tone that Rashid noticed immediately. A subtle dissonance, a lack of authenticity he couldn't quite pinpoint, but that caused him an undefined discomfort. He leaned forward slightly, studying her with those penetrating eyes that had intimidated generals and merchants alike. "Tell me, what do you like to do most in your free time?" The question took Soraya by surprise. It was too simple, too casual. She quickly searched for an answer that sounded humble and virtuous. "I like to read ancient poetry, my sultan, and care for the plants in my home garden." Rashid nodded slowly, but his eyes showed no conviction. There was something forced in the way she had responded, as if she were reciting learned lines, rather than. He decided not to press further for the moment. Perhaps it was just nervousness. Perhaps the pressure of being before a sultan. "You will be lodged in the east wing of the palace," he said finally. "You will have maids at your disposal. We will spend time together over the next few weeks to get to know each other better. If we both feel there is a genuine connection, then we will proceed with the marriage arrangements." Soraya nodded with a smile she hoped was charming, but which to Rashid's eyes seemed slightly calculating. She withdrew from the hall with another curtsy and followed the butler to her quarters. The rooms assigned to her were spectacular, a huge bed with a crimson silk canopy, windows overlooking the palace gardens, a private bathroom with a marble tub large enough to swim in. Fine clothes already hung in the wardrobes. Jewels rested in carved chests. Everything was perfect. Everything was hers. She fell onto the bed and laughed softly. She had deceived the sultan, the emissaries, everyone. Now she just had to maintain the farce long enough for the wedding to take place. After that, she would be untouchable. She would be the Sultana. No one could take away what she had conquered. The following days passed in a succession of formal encounters between Soraya and the Sultan. Breakfasts in the garden where she talked too much and he listened with growing skepticism, walks through the palace corridors where she admired every object of value with a greedy gaze she couldn't completely hide, candle-lit dinners where she tried to seduce him with studied looks and sweet words that sounded hollow. Rashid was polite, attentive, but distant. Each interaction confirmed a growing suspicion inside him like a dark seed. This woman was not who she claimed to be, not in the literal sense of identity, but in essence. There was no genuine kindness in her eyes, no humility in her manner of speaking. There was ambition, yes, and intelligence too, but the warmth his vizier had described was conspicuously absent. It was like watching an actress playing a role in the character. One night, during a particularly tense dinner, Rashid decided to test. He had ordered an elaborate banquet served, but he had also asked for some orphaned children from the royal orphanage to be invited to eat with them. He wanted to see how Amina reacted to the most vulnerable. The children entered the dining room timidly, dressed simple clothes, their eyes wide at the opulence surrounding them, near the main table, and servants began bringing them food. Rashid watched Soraya discreetly. She looked at the children with an expression trying to be benevolent but unable to completely hide her discomfort. When one of the smallest children, a boy no more than 5 years old with a dirty face and unkempt hair, approached her curiously, Soraya instinctively recoiled as if afraid he might touch her. The boy stopped, confused, and returned to his place with his head down. Rashid felt something within him grow definitively cold. A truly kind woman would have embraced the child, invited him to sit beside her, served him food with her own hands. But this woman only feigned tolerance. He decided then that he would not marry her. It didn't matter the pressure from his counselor for heirs. He could not unite himself with someone whose heart was a sterile desert. "You will be my guest in the palace," he told her a few days. "But I must be honest with you. I do not feel the connection I had hoped for. I think we both need more time to consider if this is the right path. Meanwhile, you will be treated with honor as a lady-in-waiting of the court. You will have no obligations beyond participating in some official ceremonies." Soraya felt panic. It wasn't working. Something had failed. "I understand, my Sultan. Perhaps I have been too nervous." "Allow me to show you who I really am." Rashid nodded politely, but without enthusiasm. "Time will tell." While Soraya desperately clung to her place in the palace, several days' journey away, Amina was fighting to survive. The journey from her home to the capital had been a brutal test. She had never been alone on the roads. She had never had to beg for food or shelter. The first night she slept under a tree, shivering from cold and fear, listening to every sound in the forest as if it were a mortal threat. She had brought only a small bag with some hard bread and a shawl. Hunger arrived on the second day, like an animal biting her stomach. She tried to find work in the villages she passed through, but no one would hire a lone woman without references. They looked at her with distrust. A woman traveling alone was suspicious, dangerous, potentially dishonorable. Some offered her food out of compassion, others chased her from their proper threats. Every step towards the capital was a lesson in humility and resilience. The soles of her feet filled with blisters that burst. Her clothes became covered in dust and stains. Her hair, once carefully combed, she looked like what she was, a refugee. A desperate woman who had lost everything except her determination. Finally, after 8 days of walking, she reached the outskirts of the capital. The city walls rose imposingly against the sky, and beyond on the highest hill shone the Sultan's palace. Amina stopped for a moment to observe it. Somewhere behind those white walls was her sister, living the life that had been stolen from her. The rage she had felt at first had transformed into something colder and stronger, resolve. She had not come to reclaim her place as a future sultana. She no longer cared about that. She had come to unmask the lie, to force her sister to face the consequences of her betrayal. She wanted justice, not revenge. She wanted the truth to come to light. She entered the city, blending in with the market crowds. Merchants shouted their offers, children and spices. Women haggled over prices with strident voices. No one looked at her twice. She was invisible, one among hundreds. She approached the palace gates, but the guards stopped her before she could take 3 steps. "What business do you have here?" "I'm looking for work," she replied firmly. "I know how to cook, clean, care for animals. I'll do anything." The guard looked her up and down with barely concealed contempt. "Job applications are made at the service entrance. Go around the palace to the east side. Ask for the head of servants." Amina nodded and followed the directions. The service entrance was much less grand than the main one, a simple wooden door guarded by a single. He knocked and waited. A middle-aged woman with a severe expression and a bunch of... "What do you want?" "I'm looking for work, anything. I'm a hard worker and I learn fast." The woman assessed her with critical eyes that spared no weakness. "You look like you haven't eaten in days. Where are you from?" "From the north. My family fell into disgrace. I have nowhere to go." It was a simple but effective lie. The head of servants sighed. They always needed more hands, especially now that there was an important guest in the palace, requiring constant attention. "You can work in the kitchens and the stables. The pay is low and the work is hard. If you steal anything, we'll cut off your hands. If you cause trouble, we'll throw you out without references. Understood? Follow Farah. She'll show you where to sleep and what to do." A young girl, no older than 15, appeared behind the head of servants and signaled for Amina to follow her. They traversed narrow corridors and steep stairs. They were small, austere rooms with bunk beds. Nothing like the opulence of the palace she had glimpsed from outside, but Amina didn't care. She had a roof over her head and a chance to be near her sister undetected. "The kitchen's open before dawn," Farah explained in its uniform. "You'll help prepare breakfast, clean up after each meal, and in the afternoons you'll go to the stables to feed the animals and clean the mangers. You're allowed to eat the leftovers after the nobles finish, nothing more, and don't speak to the guests or the Sultan unless they address you first. An invisible servant is a valuable servant." Every word. She changed clothes, stored her belongings under the bunk, and followed Farah back to the kitchens. Work began immediately. There were vegetables to chop, pots to scrape. Her hands, unaccustomed to such intensive labor, were soon covered in cuts and minor burns. But she didn't complain. She worked silently, keeping her head down, listening to the conversations of the other servant girls, who gossiped non-stop about life. It was thus that she learned there was a new guest, a lady named Amina, who had come to marry the Sultan but hadn't made impression. The servants described her as haughty, distant, obsessed with jewels and clothes. Amina listened with a racing heart. Her sister was here, using her name, living her life. For the first few days, Amina stayed away from areas where Soraya might be. She wasn't ready for that encounter. First, she needed to establish herself, gain the trust of the other servants, understand the palace dynamics. She worked with absolute dedication. When she finished in the kitchens, she went to the stables, where she discovered she had a natural talent for calming nervous animals. Horses that kicked and bit others would calm under her hands. Birds that refused to eat would accept food from her fingers. The stablemaster, a grumpy old man named Hassan, began to respect her. "You have a gift, girl. Animals know who has a good heart and who doesn't respond." She spent hours in the stables after finishing her other tasks. It was the only place where she felt peace, temporarily forget the betrayal that had brought her there. One afternoon, while tending to the injured leg of a hawk that had been hurt during a hunt, she didn't notice someone had entered the stable. It was the Sultan, dressed in riding clothes, looking for his favorite horse. He stopped upon seeing her, intrigued by the scene, an unknown servant holding a dangerous hawk with an impossible tenderness. The bird, known for attacking anyone who approached, was still in her hands, allowing her to clean its wound, and Rashid watched silently, not wanting to interrupt. There was something in the way she moved, in the softness of her voice as she spoke to the hawk, that reminded him of something he had been searching for without knowing. When she finally released the bird and turned around him, Amina felt the air catch in her throat. She recognized the Sultan immediately, though she had never seen him. His presence was unmistakable. Rashid saw in those honey-colored eyes something that had been missing in the eyes of the woman who called herself Amina: authenticity. Without a word he bowed his head and left the stable, but something within him had awakened, and though neither of them knew it at that moment, that brief, silent encounter had planted the first seed of a truth that would suit. The days following the encounter in the stable passed strangely. He couldn't stop thinking about the servant with the hawk. There was something about her that haunted him even in his dreams. The way her hands had held the bird without violence, the softness in her voice when she spoke to it as if it were a frightened child, and above all, those honey-colored eyes that had looked at him without artifice, without calculation, without the desperate need to impress he saw in almost everyone he crossed paths with. It was as if he had seen, for the first time in years, someone who simply existed without a hidden agenda. Curiosity consumed him. He needed to know who that woman was. During breakfast the next morning, while Soraya talked incessantly about the fabrics she had seen in the market like for her dresses, Rashid interrupted her abruptly. "Tell me, have you ever cared for injured animals?" Soraya blinked, confused by the sudden change of topic. "Injured animals, my Sultan?" "Yes, birds, horses, stray dogs. Have you ever taken the time to heal a vulnerable creature?" Soraya searched her memory desperately for something she could use as a convincing response. She vaguely remembered that Amina used to pick up fallen birds from nests when they were children in that. She found it dirty, unnecessary, waste of time. "I have shown compassion when necessary," cautiously. "That is not what I asked." Soraya felt the ground move beneath her feet. Something had changed in him, something she couldn't identify, but that filled her with anxiety. "I believe there are more productive ways to show kindness, my Sultan. Helping the poor, for example, to the needy. Animals are, after all, Rashid looked at her with an expression Soraya couldn't interpret. It was contempt mixed with disappointment. "Just animals," he. "I see. Nothing more." He finished his breakfast in silence and withdrew, leaving Soraya plunged into agitated confusion. She knew she had said something wrong, but she didn't understand what. She tried to remember everything she knew about her sister, her likes, her passions, but her knowledge was superficial. Stand Amina. She had only envied her. Rashid walked the palace corridors with his hands clasped behind his back, lost in thoughts he shared with no one. He needed to see the servant again. He needed to confirm if what he had felt in that brief encounter was real or just a product of his imagination, desperate to find something genuine in a world of masks. He went down to the palace's inner gardens, an area he didn't normally frequent. It was a space originally designed for his late wife, full of rare flowers and ornamental fountains. After her death, it had fallen into semi-abandonment. The gardeners maintained the basics, but no one put real love into the place, till now. As he approached, he heard a voice singing softly. It was an ancient melody, a lullaby that the kingdom's mothers had sung to their children since time immemorial. He stopped behind a column and watched. It was her, the servant with the hawk. She was kneeling beside a large planter, replanting wilted flowers with meticulous care. Her hands were covered in soil, but they moved with a delicacy that seemed impossible task. She sang as she worked, completely absorbed in her labor, oblivious to everything else. Rashid stood motionless, watching her as if she were an apparition. He had forgotten that people could find joy in simple tasks. He had forgotten that there were souls who didn't need audiences to be. He cleared his throat gently to announce his presence. Amina started and turned quickly, her hands still full of soil. Upon recognizing him, her eyes widened with surprise and some fear. She stood up awkwardly and tried to curtsy, but almost lost her balance in the process. Rashid had to suppress a smile. "Forgive me, my Sultan, I didn't know you were here. The flowers were dying, and I thought—" "It's all right," he interrupted gently. "You don't need to apologize for doing something beautiful." Without understanding. Sultan's didn't speak like that. Sultan's didn't come down to the gardens to chat with servants. Something was out of place, but she didn't dare question it. "What is your name?" asked Rashid. Moment of panic. She couldn't use her real name. If she said Amina, everything would become complicated quickly. "Layla, my Sultan. My name is Layla." She had used her mother's name without thinking too much. It was the first thing that came to mind. Rashid repeated the name mentally, testing it, finding it fitting in some poetic way. Layla, night in the ancient language, seemed appropriate for someone who had appeared in his life like a star in the darkness. "Layla, have you been working at the palace long?" "No, my Sultan, only a few weeks." "And where are you from?" Amina hesitated. Every word was a potential mind. "From the north." "My family fell on hard times. I came to the capital seeking a fresh start." It wasn't completely false. It just omitted crucial details. He nodded slowly, studying her with an intensity that— "The hawk you healed, how did you know what to do?" My mother taught me when I was a child. She said all creatures deserve compassion, that the size or importance of something doesn't cared for. Your mother was wise." "She was." There was a comfortable silence between them. Rashid approached the flowers she had been replanting and examined them with genuine interest. "These are desert roses. My wife loved them. She said they were like strong people, beautiful precisely because they survive in impossible conditions." In his voice, it wasn't just the mention of his dead wife. It was the loneliness he carried like an She must have been an extraordinary woman. "She was, and the world is poorer without her." They stood in silence for a longer moment. Then Rashid shook off the melancholy, as if it were dust, and looked directly at her. "I would like you to take charge of these gardens. They need someone who understands them. Hassan tells me you have a talent with animals. I want to see if that talent extends to plants as well." Amina didn't know what to say. It was a strange request coming from the Sultan, but she nodded. "It will be an honor, my Sultan." "Good. I will come to visit you from time to see the progress." He said nothing more. He withdrew, leaving Amina with a racing heart and 1,000 unanswered questions. Why had the Sultan sought her out? Why did he seem interested in her? It was dangerous. If he recognized her, if he discovered who she really was, the consequences would be unpredictable. But at the same time, something within her had awakened during the Sultan was not as she had imagined. He was losses, with a capacity for gentleness that made him more human than his title suggested. The following days established a pattern. Rashid found excuses to visit the gardens. Sometimes he came early in the morning's council meetings. Other times in the afternoon began to descend. There was always an apparent reason. He needed fresh air. He sought a moment of peace. But both knew the excuses were just that. What he really sought was her presence. They conversed while she worked. Rashid told her about the difficulties of ruling, the impossible decisions he faced daily, the loneliness that came with power, and without judgment, without offering false solutions, only with a silent understanding he hadn't found. In return, she shared stories from her childhood, carefully edited to omit identifiable details, but true in their emotional essence. "I had a sister," she said one afternoon, pruning jasmine. "We were very different. She always wanted more than she had. I only wanted people to be happy." "What happened to her?" Amina, her throat. "She betrayed me. She took something that didn't belong to her and destroyed my life in the process." Rashid looked at her with a new intensity. "That's why you came here. You're running away." "I'm not running away. I'm searching for something. I don't know exactly what, but I'll know when I find it." He wanted to ask more, but he respected her silence. There was pain in her eyes that he recognized. They were two wounded souls finding temporary solace. Meanwhile, in the opulent rooms of the East Wing, Soraya began to realize something was terribly wrong. Rashid no longer sought her company. He cancelled dinners with vague excuses. When they were together, his mind was clearly elsewhere. She tried to regain his attention with more elaborate dresses, conversations about topics she thought would interest him, calculated flirtations. Nothing worked. It was like trying to catch smoke with her hands. One morning, while walking through the palace looking for the Sultan to invite him to breakfast together, she saw him walking towards the inner gardens. Curious and jealous, she followed him at a safe distance. What she saw filled her with icy fury. Rashid was conversing with a servant, a common-looking woman with dirt-stained hands and hair tied in a simple braid. They spoke with an intimacy she had never achieved with him. Rashid was smiling, really smiling, something he had never done in her presence. The servant said something, and he laughed softly, a genuine laugh that resonated in the garden like music. Soraya felt jealousy consuming her from within. Who was that woman? Why was the Sultan wasting time with a mere servant when he had a noble lady waiting? She waited until Rashid withdrew, and then approached the garden with determined. Amina was kneeling by the flowers, humming that same lullaby, completely unaware of the storm approaching. Soraya cleared her throat loudly. Amina looked up, and their eyes met for the first time since the betrayal stopped. Amina's eyes opened in absolute shock. Soraya's reflected panic for a fraction of a second before fury. They looked at each other in silence, a silence charged with years of resentment and "What are you doing here?" Amina stood up slowly, wiping her hands on neck speed. She wasn't ready for this moment. She hadn't planned what to say. "I work here," she replied. "You came to ruin everything. You came to expose me. I didn't come for you. I didn't even know you were here when I arrived." Soraya laughed without humor. "You expect me to believe that? You appear at the palace just after I take my place and pretend it's your place." Amina felt the rage she had been containing for weeks finally erupt. "Your place. You stole my identity, Soraya. You drugged me. You locked me in and took my name as if it were a dress you could put on at your pleasure. That is not your place. It never was." Soraya took a step forward, her eyes shining dangerously. "And what are you going to do about it? Are you going to run to the Sultan and tell him everything? Do you think he'll believe you? You're a servant. I am his guest of honor. Who do you think has more credibility?" Amina looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. "Then why are you here?" "Because I needed to see with my own eyes what kind of person. I needed to understand how someone can be remorse." Soraya felt a pang of something that it quickly. "I did what I had to do. Your shadow. The good Amina, the sweet Amina. For once in my life, I took what I wanted." "And has it made you happy? Living a lie, using my name, pretending to be someone you can never be?" Soraya didn't respond. The question had touched a truth she didn't want to face. She wasn't happy. The palace, the jewels, the dresses, none of it filled the void within her. And worse still, the Sultan saw her for what she was, a beautiful but hollow fraud. Amina saw the doubt in her sister's eyes and felt a profound sadness. There was no victory in this, only mutual loss. "I'm not going to expose you," she repeated, "but I'm not going to leave either. I have as much right to be here as you do. I will work, I will live my life, and when the right time comes, the truth is known. Because lies are always discovered, Soraya. Always." Soraya felt real fear for the first time. It wasn't physical fear. It was fear of losing everything she had gained, fear of being unmasked, fear of facing the consequences of her betrayal. But she couldn't show weakness. "If you try anything, I will destroy you. I'll find a way." Amina didn't respond. She simply knelt back down by the flowers and continued her work as if her sister didn't exist. The message was clear. She no longer had power over her. Soraya retreated from the garden, trembling with rage and fear. She needed a plan. She needed to find a way to eliminate her sister before everything. That night, as she lay in her luxurious bed, unable to sleep, she made a decision. She would sabotage Amina. She would make her seem incompetent, problematic, untrustworthy. She would sow doubts about her character. And if that didn't work, she would find a more direct way to eliminate the threat. The next day, Soraya began her campaign. She spoke to the head of servants, suggesting she had noticed objects disappearing from her room and suspected some of the new servants. She spilled wine in the hallway and then it passed by. She tried to convince Hassan that Amina mistreated the animals when desperate. The other servants appreciated Amina. Hassan defended her vehemently. The head of servants found her accusations vague and unfounded. Every sabotage attempt failed because Amina's genuine kindness had created an invisible network of protection. The people who knew her defended her instinctively. Meanwhile, Rashid continued visiting the gardens. The conversations with Layla became deeper, more personal. She told him about her dreams of having a place of her own where she could care for animals and plants without fear. He spoke to her about the pressure of being Sultan, of making decisions that affected thousands of lives, of the loneliness of a throne no one else could truly share. They were falling in love. Neither admitted it openly, but it was evident in the looks they shared, the smiles they reserved only for each other, the way Rashid began to inevitably compare the two women in his life, the one who called herself Amina but seemed false in every gesture, and Layla, the servant whose authenticity shone like sunlight. The choice was obvious, but there were protocols, expectations, political consequences. He couldn't simply dismiss his guest of honor and declare his love for a servant, or perhaps he could. After all, he was the Sultan. Rules existed to be rewritten when justice demanded it. He just needed the right moment, the right truth, and that truth was closer to being revealed than any of them imagined. The night of the grand banquet arrived like an announced but inevitable storm. Rashid had ordered the celebration with a specific view. Officially, it was an event to honor his special guest and present her formally to the entire court. In reality, it was a carefully designed trap. Over the past weeks, the puzzle pieces had begun to fit together in his mind. The inconsistencies in the behavior of the woman who called herself Amina, the authenticity of the servant called Layla, overheard by chance, Hassan's reports of sabotage attempts. Something didn't add up, and that night get answers. The main hall of the palace had been transformed into a spectacle of perfumed oil lamps hung from the ceiling, creating artificial constellations. Long tables were covered with silk tablecloths embroidered in gold and silver, mountains of exotic fruits, trays of spiced lamb, jugs of wine from the kingdom's best vineyards, all arranged with military precision. Musicians played lutes and flutes from a raised corner. The air vibrated with anticipation. The kingdom's nobility had been summoned. Counselors, wealthy merchants, diplomats from neighboring kingdoms, all dressed in their finest attire, all curious to meet the future sultana. Soraya prepared for that night like a general preparing for battle. She chose a dress of deep emerald that highlighted her figure, with embroideries of golden thread forming patterns. Her hair was braided with tiny pearls that captured the light like dewdrops. Kohl framed her eyes, giving her a dramatic, seductive appearance. Heavy jewels adorned her neck and wrists. She looked like a queen from ancient legends, but inside, her heart beat with uncontrollable anxiety. Something about the way the Sultan had invited her to the banquet seemed suspicious. His voice had been too formal, his eyes too calculating. She tried to shake off the foreboding and convinced herself it was just paranoia. This was her night, her moment to shine before the entire kingdom. The servants had been mobilized en masse to attend the event. Amina tried to avoid being assigned to the main hall, but the head of servants insisted they needed all available hands, so she found herself wearing the most formal servant's uniform, a simple cream-colored dress with an impeccable white apron. and receiving instructions on how to serve wine without spilling it and how to withdraw without being noticed. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She would be in the same room as her sister, the possibilities of something going terribly wrong. The guests began to arrive at dusk, the hall filled with animated conversations, polite laughter, the clinking of glasses toasting, purple tunics, the color reserved for royalty with a golden band in his chest. His presence dominated the hall effortlessly. He didn't need to raise his voice for silence to fall when he entered. Finally, the moment everyone was waiting for arrived. The double doors opened and Soraya entered, escorted by 2 guards. She walked with her head high, a perfect smile on her lips, greeting with slight nods to the left and right. She seemed born for that moment. She took her place next to the Sultan, and the banquet officially began. Amina stayed in the shadows, moving between the tables with a tray of wine glasses, filling empty cups, removing dirty. She kept her gaze down, invisible as she had been taught, but occasionally she lifted her eyes and saw her sister laughing at something a noble said, lightly touching the Sultan's arm in a gesture of false intimacy. Every interaction was like a splinter digging her skin. It wasn't envy she felt. It was sadness. Sadness to see her sister living such an elaborate lie that she perhaps no longer even remembered the truth. Midway through the banquet, Rashid stood, immediately silent. He raised his wineglass and spoke in a clear voice that resonated to the farthest corners. Tonight we celebrate more than a banquet. We celebrate the possibility of a new beginning for our kingdom. My guest Amina has been with us for weeks, and in that time I've learned much about appearances, about truth, about what truly makes someone worthy of honor. There were confused murmurs among the guests. Soraya smiled, but her eyes showed uncertainty. Where was this going? Rashid continued without looking directly at her. I have prepared a gift for my esteemed guest, a necklace that belonged to my late wife. It is an invaluable piece, not for its material worth, but for its significance. Only someone with a truly noble heart should wear it. He signaled, and a servant brought a velvet box. He opened it, revealing a spectacular necklace of sapphires and diamonds that captured the light in 1,000 ways. The whole collectively gasped at its beauty. The servant approached Soraya and placed the necklace around her neck. It was heavy, cold against her skin, but beautiful. Soraya touched the stones with trembling fingers, feeling momentarily overwhelmed by genuine emotion. Perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps the Sultan truly appreciated her. Thank you, my Sultan. It is extraordinary. I will wear it with the honor it deserves. Rashid nodded, and the banquet continued. The music resumed. Conversation. Soraya felt euphoric. The necklace was a public statement and something. But her euphoria was short-lived. She leaned over to listen to something a noble lady was saying. The necklace's clasp, which hadn't been secured properly. The necklace fell to the floor with a metallic sound that cut through nearby conversations, like a rose. A falling jewel was considered a symbol of mystery. Amina, who was passing nearby with a tray of empty cups, saw the necklace on the floor. Out of instinct, she left the tray on a nearby table, knelt, and picked up both hands. She held it with reverent delicacy, as if it were an injured bird that could break with the wrong. She placed it on a clean linen napkin on a tray and stood to hand it to Soraya. It was a simple gesture, a servant doing her job, but Rashid, who had been watching everything from his elevated position, went completely still. The way she had picked up the necklace, the delicacy in her hands, the respect in her posture, was exactly how she had held the injured hawk, exactly how she cared for the flowers in the garden. Suddenly, everything illuminated in his mind with searing clarity. The scattered puzzle pieces came together, forming a complete and devastating picture. Layla, the servant who had stolen his heart without trying, and Amina, the guest sitting beside him, pretending to be someone she clearly was not. With the necklace, he studied their faces. They had to be sisters. He stood up abruptly. The movement was so sudden that silence fell over the hall like a heavy mantle. All eyes turned to him, He walked around the table and approached where Amina stood, the tray still extended. He looked directly into her eyes for the first time. The moment she had feared had arrived. "What is your name?" he asked in calm. "Layla, my Sultan." "Your real name?" There was a silence that stretched like a rope about to snap. Amina felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused. The hall exploded in confused murmurs. Soraya stood up so fast her chair fell backward with a crash. Her face had lost all color. Rashid raised a hand, and silence returned instantly. "Explain." The arrival of the emissaries, the choice that had fallen upon her, her sister's envy, the sleeping draft, waking up locked in, her escape, her arrival at the palace seeking answers. Every word came out as if it had been trapped under pressure for too long. When she finished, tears finally streamed freely down her cheeks, but Rashid turned to Soraya, his eyes burning with. She tried to invent an alternative story where she was the victim, where Amina was lying out of jealousy, where it was all a terrible misunderstanding. But her words stumbled over each other, her voice trembled, and everyone in the hall could see the guilt written in every line of her face. Finally she collapsed. Tears burst from her eyes, and the words came out between sobs. Yes, it's true. I did it. I took her place because all my life I've lived in her shadow. Because I deserved something beautiful too, because I was tired of being invisible, while she received all the love, all the attention, all the good the world had to offer. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But the apologies came too late, which was done. Rashid felt a rage so profound he had to close his eyes to control it. He had been about to make a monumental mistake. He had been about to unite himself with a woman whose heart was a pit of deceit, while the woman who should have truly come to his palace, the woman whose kindness was so genuine it shone even when she tried to hide as a servant, had been cleaning floors and caring for animals. "Guards!" His voice cut the air like a whip. "Take this woman to the cells. She will be judged for her crimes against the kingdom." The guards moved quickly, taking Soraya by the arms. She was too shattered, too aware that she had lost everything. But before they could take her out of the hall, a voice rose. It was soft but firm, and it stopped everyone in their tracks. "Wait!" Amina took a step forward. Everyone looked at her in disbelief. What more could she say after having been so aid? She approached where the guards were holding her sister, and looked Soraya directly in the eyes. "I hate you at this moment," she said, "my life, but I also pity you, because you have lived so long with envy that it has consumed punishment worse than any cell." She turned to Rashid. "Do not punish her, my Sultan. Hatred only breeds more hatred. Revenge only perpetuates pain. Let her go. Banish her if you must, but do not change. Give her the chance to find who she really is when she is no longer pretending to be someone else." The entire hall was in absolute silence. No one could believe what they were hearing. A woman who had been betrayed in the most vile way was interceding for her betrayer. Rashid looked at her with something that went beyond admiration. He saw in that moment what he had been searching for all his life, a heart so pure it could harbor forgiveness even when justice demanded punishment. He approached her and took her hands gently. They were calloused from work, stained with garden soil, trembling with emotion, but to him they were the most he had ever seen. "Your heart is more worthy than any throne," he said, his charged with emotion. "I have searched all my life for someone with whom to share my kingdom, someone whose kindness could balance my power, someone who would remind me that to rule is to serve, not just to command. I thought that person had been sent to me, but I was wrong. She did not arrive in a golden carriage dressed in silk. She arrived on foot, hungry and betrayed, and hid in the gardens caring for flowers, and stole my heart without even trying." Amina felt the tears return, but this time they were not of pain. Rashid knelt before her in front of the entire. The gesture caused collective gasps. A sultan did not kneel before anyone. But he wasn't just a sultan in that moment. He was a man in love, asking for something power could not buy. Marry me, not because the emissaries chose you, not out of duty or protocol. Marry me because in these weeks you have shown me what it means to live with authenticity, because your conversations in the garden were the only moments of true peace I have felt. Because when I look at you, I see a future where the kingdom can be ruled with compassion instead of just for years. This man she had known as a distant sultan and discovered as a wounded soul seeking healing, just like her. She had not planned this. She had not come to the palace seeking love or a crown. But life had a strange way of bringing people where they needed to, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. The hall exploded in applause and cheers. Rashid stood and embraced her, not caring that her servant's uniform contrasted with his royal robes. The nobles stood as a sign of respect. The musicians began to play joyful melodies. It was a spontaneous celebration born of witnessing extraordinary, the triumph of truth over deception, of forgiveness over revenge, of real love over appearances. Soraya watched everything from where the guards. She felt no rage anymore, only a profound emptiness and the belated understanding of what she had lost. She had lost her sister, her family, her own identity in the process of trying to steal someone else's. Rashid approached her with a serious but not cruel expression. I banish you from the kingdom of Kamar. You will have enough money to start a new life elsewhere. But if you ever return, you will face the full force of justice. Go, and I hope you find peace away from here. Soraya nodded without words. She looked at her sister one last time. Amina returned her gaze with eyes that held sadness, but also something passion. She was escorted out of the palace. That same night she disappeared into the darkness, bound for an uncertain but necessary destiny. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations, and with speed but also with beauty. Amina resisted excessive opulence but accepted ceremonies that honored the kingdom's traditions. They married under a full moon in the palace gardens, surrounded by the flowers she had cared for, with Hassan as a witness alongside the most important noble kingdom. Amina wore a simple ivory adornments because her happiness made her shine more. Rashid looked at her as if he couldn't believe his fortune. When they were declared husband and wife, the entire kingdom celebrated, not just because they had a new sultana, they celebrated because they had witnessed something that restored their faith. Kindness rewarded, truth victorious, love triumphant over manipulation. The years that followed were prosperous. Amina did not try to be a traditional sultana. She established community gardens where the poor could grow food. She opened shelters for injured animals. She listened to the complaints of the humblest people with the same attention to diplomats. Rashid ruled with strength when necessary, but with the compassion she had taught him. Together, they transformed the kingdom. Decades later, when elders told stories to children around campfires, they always included this one, the story of one who took what did not belong to her and lost everything, another who was stripped of everything but gained an entire kingdom. She did not gain it through ambition or cunning. She gained it because her heart knew only one language, kindness, and that language, more powerful than any army, more lasting than any wealth, had conquered not only the Sultan, but the very kingdom. Her sister stole her place in the palace, but she stole the Sultan's heart, and with that heart she built a legacy that no betrayal could ever destroy. The story argues that authentic kindness, integrity, and compassion are more powerful and enduring forces than cunning, unbridled ambition, and manipulation. The happy ending is not just a romantic fairy tale, but the natural reward for a person of sound character whose actions, even in the most humble and difficult circumstances, reveal their true nobility. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to like, share, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We love knowing how far our stories can reach.